Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's now time for another one of Mr. Owen's Lectures! Thank you for joining me today. We are going to do U.S. entry and European theater World War II today. I wore my English soccer jersey in preparation for this. Let's get started. All right. So remember where we left off. Hitler and Mussolini are being aggressive. Hitler had taken over Czechoslovakia and annexed Austria. Italy invaded Ethiopia and other parts of Africa. Japan had invaded China and other parts of Asia. The world does nothing but warn them all to stop. They say, you stop right there, no more. But they don't stop. When countries are more worried about Stalin and the Soviet Union or USSR, they adopt a policy of what's called appeasement. You better have your guided notes out. You better be filling this in. They adopt a policy of appeasement towards Germany and Japan, which means they make concessions to other nations to avoid conflict. They're appeasing them. They're just letting them do their thing. They don't want to start a fight, and they know if they stand in their way, it's going to start a fight. They don't want to fight. Okay? So what's going to kick this bad boy off? Hitler invades Poland, like we had talked about, and he splits it in half with his arch enemy, Joseph Stalin. Hitler blames communists. He hates communists. Okay? Communists don't like Hitler. So the two are like arch nemesis. This is like the Hulk and Thanos teaming up. Okay, not a Marvel fan, fine. This is like Hans and Anna getting back together. Not a Frozen fan, okay? This is like Darth Sidious and Yoda having a picnic. Now, boy, wouldn't that be a cool meme. And if you're not a Star Wars fan, Marvel fan, or a Frozen fan, well, I just can't help you. But those are three great examples of what this is like, and the world is shocked. Okay, France and Great Britain declare war on Germany September 1st, 1939. Hitler doesn't waste time and invades Norway. Okay, then he turns his sights on France. Many thought a repeat of World War I's stalemate. Remember the trenches? Not this time. The Nazis will use a tactic called blitzkrieg. Okay, it means lightning war in German. And their troops move extremely quickly with armored vehicles, and this prevents the French from recovering. It doesn't help that Hitler has also given many of his troops what are called bennies. Bennies is a drug similar to what you would call meth today, aka speed. So this charged up all the troops. They're hopped up on speed, basically, and the troops roll over France and conquer Paris in about 3 weeks. This is going to trap most of the British army in northern France in a place called Dunkirk. If you've ever seen the movie with Harry Styles, that's literally what it's based on, Dunkirk. If you haven't seen it, get parent permission. It is a good movie. With no time to waste, British citizens hop in their personal boats and they sail across the English Channel to Dunkirk, which is in northern France, and they grab as many soldiers as they can. Most of the British troops are saved. So if you can imagine, you're a British citizen, you're not in the military, and you hear about all these troops stranded in France, and look on the map here, Britain and France not far from each other. People have actually swam it. It's not an easy swim. Those people are famous, but it's not that far. And people literally sail over and they grab as many troops as they can in their little boat. And they sail back, which is crazy to think about. So these troops get rescued, and it's a big deal because this is going to prevent an outright invasion of Great Britain. This begins what's called the Battle of Britain. Okay, the Battle of Britain. Hitler fears heavy casualties from invading Great Britain. Remember, Great Britain is an island. Let's pause for a fun fact! I know it gets a little confusing because you hear the term, like on my shirt, I've got England, you hear the term Great Britain, you hear the term United Kingdom, and honestly, most Americans have no idea what the difference is. So check out this map right here. You see this part that doesn't include Scotland and Wales? That is England. Okay? When you throw in Wales and Scotland, now you have Great Britain. And then when you add in Northern Ireland, Great Britain becomes the United Kingdom. And that includes England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And that's the difference. And that's probably something that you should know. Okay? So, remember Great Britain is an island? So Hitler decides to bomb it into submission. Hitler's really freaked out about an invasion of England. He thinks it's going to cost a lot of troops. So he thinks he can just bomb them into quitting. Okay? And the Nazi Air Force was known as, do you remember? I went over this in the last video. What was it called? You said Luftwaffe. That was right on. And the British Air Force, which was known as the RAF, or Royal Air Force. Fun fact! / story time! All right, one cool bit of information I can share with you is my grandmother was actually in the Royal Air Force. She fought in the Royal Air Force. It wasn't just men fighting in this war. She was a dispatcher of pilots in the Royal Air Force. And some of her stories were really sad. She said that she would dispatch guys to fight off the Luftwaffe, and when they would dispatch back in, sometimes they didn't come back. And so she got to know some of these people, and so she said it was really sad when she would radio a guy to head out, and then when they're supposed to radio back in, and they wouldn't be there. She said it was heartbreaking. But she fought for the Royal Air Force, so yay, Mr. Owen's grandma. Okay, the Nazis dropped these awful things called buzz bombs on London, and a buzz bomb. Picture like your couch as a bomb. These things were huge. And when they dropped them, they would make this really loud buzzing sound. Like they would shoot them out and they'd go, it was so loud. And then when they stopped buzzing, it meant they were dropping straight down. So once you didn't hear that buzz anymore, you knew an explosion was coming. And they were really scary. Okay? And despite awful casualties and damages, the British never surrender and eventually win the Battle of London and gain dominance over the skies of Europe. Because of that Royal Air Force and how hard it fought, yay, Mr. Owen's grandma, they're able to beat the Luftwaffe. However, Great Britain has been severely weakened and desperately needs help. Okay? Hitler believes that Great Britain is finished. So he decides to backstab the USSR and surprise attack them. Remember, Hitler and Stalin and the USSR are arch rivals. I told you, like Thanos and the Hulk. Okay, like Hans and Anna, like Sidious and Yoda. They do not like each other, but they sign an agreement to not fight. And Hitler's going to backstab Russia and he's going to attack. Or excuse me, the USSR, and he's going to attack. It's called Operation Barbarossa. And Hitler comes very, very close to conquering the Western Soviet Union, which is what he wanted to conquer. The eastern part's freezing cold, and they were going to conquer that and get Moscow. But a couple of things stop him and change the outcome of World War II because Hitler came very close. If he had finished off Russia, he probably would have conquered the world. Okay, one, the USSR had one of the worst winters it had ever had. You remember when we went over the French Revolution and Napoleon? The same thing happened to Napoleon when he tried to conquer Russia. Number two, Stalin gives order 227, okay, which means troops will burn everything when they retreat, including homes, supplies, and food, and they will also fight to the death, no surrender. Again, this is the exact same thing that happened to Napoleon. Remember when you're fighting a war and you're moving forward and you go into a town and you take it over, you take their food, you take their clothes, you take their supplies. And when towns keep getting burned, it's harder to resupply your army. Okay, number three, Hitler is a conceited jerk, and so is Stalin. These guys' egos were massive. Okay, and luckily for us, or we might all be speaking German. Okay, Germany is literally at the doorstep of Moscow. Take a look at this picture. Okay, that is the USSR capital. And really, the Nazis probably could have easily taken it. And then the war would have been over in Russia and the USSR, and they would have taken it over. Instead, Hitler decides to head south and conquer the city of Stalingrad. Stalingrad literally is named after Joseph Stalin, hence the term Stalingrad, as an insult. He's like, I'm going to get Moscow next, but first I'm going to take your city. Ha ha ha. Well, Stalin, he says, okay, let's do this. And the two armies dig in, and one of the bloodiest battles in history takes place. And eventually the USSR wins, and Hitler is forced to retreat. If you get permission, there's a movie called Enemy at the Gates that's about it, and it is really, 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 really good. And it's about how snipers changed the war for Russia, for the USSR in this battle. But a really good movie, of course, get parent permission. So, once Hitler loses in Stalingrad, his men are retreating. And remember, everything's been burned in their wake, so they got no way to resupply. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan has turned into a militaristic-run government. Their country is overseen by Emperor Hirohito, who is considered a living god to his people. However, his generals have taken over, and the country is being run by Prime Minister and former General Hideki Tojo. We talked about that in the last video. Okay? Japan is running out of fuel, gasoline. Like, you can't have an army with ships and tanks and cars and jeeps without fuel. Okay? Remember, Japan is an island and is limited on their resources. They need fuel to run their ships and armored vehicles as they continue invading China and Asia. The U.S. had been selling them fuel and stopped selling them fuel and tells them to stop their pursuit of Asia and islands in the Pacific Ocean. The US allied with the Philippines, which had been a former territory of the United States and had really just gotten their independence in 1935, and Hawaii, which was a current US territory. It was not a state at the time, it was just a territory. Okay? And when the US cuts off oil and Japan is about to run out of oil, they respond by planning an attack to sink most of the US Navy. They believed that they could cripple our Navy with a devastating attack and prevent the United States from being a threat, and then they would be able to continue their conquest of Asia and would have no embargoes on oil because the U.S. had told other countries don't give them oil either. They thought, we'll just kick the U.S. out of this and we'll keep going. Okay? The U.S. was very upset after World War I was over. They completely rejected the Treaty of Versailles and believed the treaty would lead to future conflict. Yeah, they were right. The U.S. and the rest of the world was also dealing with the Great Depression, which began in 1929 with the stock market crash. The U.S. economy was in turmoil, and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, as he was referred to, was focused on rebuilding the economy and was reluctant to go to war. As a result, the United States adopted a policy of isolationism, which means the United States will stay out of other countries' affairs, also known as separateness. We were going to be separate, we were going to isolate, we were going to stay away from other countries. But in the coordinated attack on December 7, 1941, the Japanese, led by Admiral Yamamoto, they attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the Philippines, and the island of Midway. A lot of Americans don't realize that it wasn't just Hawaii that was attacked. And this was a very well planned out coordinated attack. And the Japanese are going to sink almost the entire U.S. Western Navy fleet, which was stationed at Pearl Harbor. In fact, one of the aircraft carriers went out like last minute randomly and didn't get sunk, and was one of the only ships that didn't get sunk because they had gone out at last minute. But they basically sink everything that was in Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor doesn't really have a way out, so the ships are kind of stuck in, and should have never really been a military base the way it was set up there. And the Japanese are going to see this as an opportunity, and they're going to do a lot of damage. Okay, and they also invade the Philippines, and they capture Filipino and U.S. soldiers, and they'll force them to go on what's known as the Bataan Death March. And this is another really famous and heinous thing that happens in World War II. This is where Japanese troops force about 76,000 prisoners of war, who were both U.S. and Filipino, to march for 5 to 10 days. And a lot of them drop dead on the way. And only 56,000 prisoners survive. So most of them didn't get food or water, and they just had to march. And if you didn't make it, you didn't make it. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. will declare war on Japan. And this is where it gets crazy. A lot of Americans don't know this either. So the U.S. declares war on Japan. Okay? Not Germany. They declare war on Japan. Then Germany will respond, because they're allied with Japan, by declaring war on the U.S. And Great Britain's like, oh, thank goodness we finally get somebody to help us. So Great Britain responds by declaring war on Japan. Okay? Russia's already fighting Germany. Okay? And the U.S. will declare war on Germany. So it wasn't until Germany declared war on us that we declared war back. So the U.S. declares war on Germany. So now the U.S., the USSR, and Great Britain agree to focus on Germany together, while the U.S. will go it alone against Japan until Germany is defeated. Okay? General Douglas MacArthur is chosen to lead the U.S. troops in the South Pacific against Japan, which is crazy because MacArthur actually was retired and he was living in the Philippines. And the U.S. will send a submarine to get him out of the Philippines when the Japanese attack. And he doesn't want to leave. He wants to fight to the death as the Philippines are being taken over, because that's where he lives. He's training their military. And the U.S. president will actually be like, dude, we need you. Please leave. And so he'll leave. And he says, I promise I will return. And it's a big deal when he does free the Philippines later in World War II. But that is General Douglas MacArthur. Seriously, bad mamma jamma. Really, really good general. Okay? And then General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who will go on to be president of the United States, is chosen to lead Allied troops in Europe. Okay? So here are the teams. You have the Allies. Okay? And there are others on the Allies, but these are kind of the main players. Okay? Because you do have Norway and Sweden, and all these people are fighting. There's a whole lot of people fighting in this war. But the main dogs are USSR, the United Kingdom, which includes, like I went over, Great Britain, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. You have Canada, you have Australia, you have the United States, you have China, you have Turkey, which will join in 1943 at the Tehran Conference, and plus, like I said, many others. On the axis is Germany, Italy, and Japan. Okay? And as the war progresses, the USA and USSR and UK decide that they need to fight Hitler, And they need to create a two-front war, which we talked about. It's where you're fighting on both sides. And Germany and the USSR will battle in Russia, and the UK and USA will battle Germany in Italy and in Africa, okay, which is where they'll fight. And the US and Great Britain will fight in Africa first. They'll defeat them in Africa, and then they'll invade Italy, and they'll defeat them in Italy, and then they will invade France through Normandy. The invasion of Free France is the largest land and sea attack in history. It's known as D-Day, and it took place on June 6, 1944. Fun fact! Mr. Owen, fun fact! Fun fact about D-Day. My grandfather was actually part of the D-Day operation. I'm super proud of that. It's a big deal. Like I said, it's the largest land and sea invasion in history. Remember I had said my grandma was a part of the Royal Air Force. My grandmother and grandfather met while my grandfather was waiting to be a part of the D-Day operation. Quick little story time. He said he was at a bar playing pool, and this beautiful woman asked him if he wanted to play a game, and my grandfather said she was a complete pool shark and ran the table on him, took his money, and he said he fell in love with her on the spot. And he goes and he's a part of the D-Day invasion. He's D-Day +1, which many came a day later. And some of the stories are absolutely unreal. Some people don't like to talk about war. My grandfather was not that guy. He loved telling stories. But that's how my grandmother and grandfather met. So as awful as World War II is, I sometimes wonder if it never happened, I wouldn't be here. So crazy to think how war changes things and unites people from all over the world. Okay, but that's how Mr. Owen's grandparents meet. And once the United States and Great Britain and Canada, who are big parts of that invasion, are able to get on the beachhead of France, they're able to start moving from France towards Germany, and Russia's on the other side pushing towards Germany. And this is the beginning of the end of Hitler, forces him to fight a two-front war. And less than a year later, Hitler will commit suicide in his underground bunker. The D-Day invasion forces Germany to fight a brutal two-front war, while the USSR invades from the east and the USA and UK invade from the west. Before the war is over, though, FDR, the US president, Stalin, the dictator of USSR, and Winston Churchill, the UK prime minister, meet at what's known as the Yalta Conference to discuss the post-World War II rebuild. Before World War II is finished, US President FDR dies of polio. He was not in good health, and he's going to pass away. And like I said, Hitler commits suicide. But Harry S. Truman will take over, and he will be the president when World War II ends in Europe, when the Allies occupy Germany and Hitler commits suicide. This is known as VE Day, which is Victory in Europe. And while World War II ends in Asia, after the US drops 2 atomic bombs, which is going to be Harry S. Truman's decision, and he'll drop those bombs on Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I will cover that way in detail. I do a whole video on that. It's also a really tragic thing that happens in World War II, very controversial. This is known as VJ Day, which is Victory in Japan Day. So more videos to come on the atomic bomb and the end of World War II. But World War II officially ends on September 2nd, 1945, which is 6 years and 1 day after it started. It started on September 1st, 1939, and ironically it ends September 2nd, 1945. The date specifically won't be on the test. I just think it's fun because September 2nd happens to be my birthday. So crazy to think my birthday is the day that World War I ended on and almost started on as well. Okay. After the war, Harry S. Truman, the U.S. president, Stalin, and Churchill will meet at what's called the Potsdam Conference to discuss the post-World War II rebuild, management, dividing of Eastern Europe, and Germany, reparations, and how to govern occupied nations. The events of the Potsdam Conference in years to come will lead to the Cold War. Many more videos to come on the Cold War. Like I said, I still have one about the dropping of the atomic bomb and the war in the South Pacific, and also on the Holocaust. Somewhere between, this is a controversial number, somewhere between 70 and 85 million people will die in World War II. In the European campaign, the USSR lost the most amount of people, and they lost about 26 million people. So they'll lose the most in the European campaign. And in Asia, China will lose the most and lost about 20 million. By comparison, the US only lost about 400,000 troops. I'll repeat that because it's crazy. 70 to 85 million people die in World War II. Russia lost the most in Europe at about 26 million. China lost the most in Asia, about 20 million. US lost 400,000. So the US was quite lucky at the end of the day. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope you enjoyed it. Lots of good fun facts, lots of good stuff. And We've got many more videos to come. All right, thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you next time on Mr. Owen's Lectures.